Welcome to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement, a podcast where we dive into the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being of the law enforcement officer.
Minor injury accident in the 2700 block of 156th Avenue Northeast.
All right, welcome back to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement. I'm your host, Vernon Phillips, and today, in this episode, we have the Deputy Commissioner of FDLE with us, Matt Walsh. So what I want to do is I want to give him an opportunity just to introduce himself, tell us a little bit about his background, his history in law enforcement, his education, things like that. So, Matt, I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks, Vernon. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and talk all things law enforcement. So,
great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of FDLE. There were 3 Deputy Commissioners. So we have the Commissioner, Mark Glass, and 3 Deputy Commissioners. I'm over the Public Safety Services. So that encumbers or encompasses our uniformed police department, Capitol Police, Governor Protection, high-tech cyber, IT, CGIS, targeted violence prevention, and officer wellness. So I have about 600 people under me on my side of the house. I started my career in 1997 at Lee County Sheriff's Office. Like everyone else does that goes to a local agency, I started as a road patrol deputy, and during my time at Lee County, I worked road patrol, street crimes, auto theft detective, homicide detective, and I was a SWAT operator for 3 of those years as well. I was hired by FDLE and moved to Sebring, and that's in the middle of the state, middle of nowhere. A lot of people don't know where it is, and continued to work there for 5 years, working homicides primarily. Went back to Fort Myers as the JTTF, Joint Terrorism Task Force agent. Spent a couple of years at the FBI. Then I spent another 2 or 3 years at the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force. Worked some organized crime cases. And then I took a promotion to Jacksonville, Florida as the Special Agent Supervisor over the death squad. FDLE in those years, we worked all the unattended deaths within the prison system. So we're a very busy squad. I spent 10 years in Jacksonville, and when I left Jacksonville to come to Tallahassee, I was the special agent in charge for the Jacksonville region, which is 13 counties. I came to Tallahassee about just over 2.5 years ago as the deputy commissioner, and I've been here since. I'm also a social worker, so I went back and got a Master of Social Work degree. So I've given psychotherapy to the veteran population and to the law enforcement population. Married for 20, 21, 20, 22, almost 23 years.
You better get that right.
Yeah, I know. 2 kids, 1 in college, daughter, and 1 still in high school, getting ready to go to college. So that's my brief background.
Well, I appreciate that. There's a lot of history there. I mean, obviously you've spent many years in law enforcement, and now you're in the position to where you're able to kind of step in and also help them, throughout just the many things that they incur throughout their career. So I appreciate that. I appreciate what you do. So, there's a lot of things there we can pull in, we can unpack and everything, but, knowing the job, knowing the profession, knowing that, your history of law enforcement, what is it that you do that keeps yourself balanced?
That's a great question.
Mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, all the way across the board.
Yeah, that's a great question. First is what I've learned over the years, because this is a process. This isn't an easy job, and there are things that I used to do. In the book Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement by Kevin Gilmartin, he talks about the uses. I used to do that because we get so involved in our career. Our career becomes us, and as I've learned and grown, and with my relationship with my wife and in my faith and my kids, connection is a very important part of how I make sure I'm taking care of myself. So my wife and I, we dedicate time every day to connect, to walk, to really unpack our daily stuff. Mentally, again, it's a learning process. Until I went back for my social work degree, I didn't really deal with a lot of stuff. Whether it's from when I was a kid, and then all the stuff that kind of layers on after you become a police officer. So my wife, of course, we always connected, but until I went back for my advanced degree, in really focusing on psychotherapy, you have to work on yourself. And I realized, well, I need to take care of myself. So I started going to therapy, and it helps me get rid of all that stuff that kind of just packs up over time. And then spiritually, again, the career takes you on all these paths, and sometimes you get away from your faith. And because of a strong relationship with my wife, she recognized I was starting to stray from my faith. And the next thing I knew, we were volunteering at church. And we volunteered at church for 6 years, teaching CCD to the kids and with the youth group. And really, again, that's connections. So we make sure that I always keep connected to what's important to me, and that's people, and that's my family, my faith. And that's how I've really gone after taking care of myself.
Yeah, and those are all great points, because especially you hit on a couple things that there are bad words in law enforcement, right? Like the connectiveness with your significant other, because a lot of times what happens is you get into the profession and it becomes just so much a part of you that a lot of times your significant other, your spouse, they take that back seat, right, to the career.
That's right.
And because of that, we have marriages that suffer. So, making sure that you have that connectivity, having that, that common things in place that you guys are able to do together, that just strengthens your relationship, strengthens your marriage. So, that's a huge, huge key point that, we need to be continuing to instill, in our law enforcement professionals. Also, you hit on another word that we don't talk about, right? A bad word, we said therapy.
Yeah.
So most people in law enforcement, they don't like that word, right? It's one of those words what do you mean? You want me to go sit down and talk with somebody? Yeah. I mean, you do it all the time, and you just don't even realize it. I mean, a lot of people have that person that they go to and they just kind of dump, right?
Yep.
Well, that's essentially what therapy is. Yeah, there's a little bit of differences there, but you're going and you're able to express and kind of get a lot of that stuff that you just hold deep down inside out. And then once you do that, it gives you the ability to process it, and then also heal and recover and move forward. And also the faith aspect, maintaining that connectivity. Those are all vital points that we want to continue to push and strive for our law enforcement professionals to really just lean into, because a lot of times there's just maybe one focus. I mean, for a lot of times we focus on just the physical aspect, right? Making sure you're in shape, make sure this, and yeah, that's a great component, but that's not the only one.
That's right. That's right.
We need to invest into all those areas of our lives, to just develop us and round us out to be the most effective and efficient person we can be. And if we're not doing that, then we're doing a disservice to ourselves, but we're also doing a disservice to the individuals that serve. So
Yeah,
I appreciate what you had to say on that.
No, my pleasure. When I first started, if you were hurting, you didn't tell anybody because it was weakness. That's how it was viewed. That's the stigma behind, just suffering or having a hard time with something. And if you're weak, then you're a coward. And if you're a coward, people can't trust you. Then you'll be isolated. So what do? We just bottle it up. But it's kind of like, it's kind of like pouring 10 ounces of water into a 5-ounce glass. You can bottle up until it gets to that very top, until it starts overflowing. And that's when I've seen friends, colleagues leave the profession, kill themselves. And it's unacceptable. So, I think over the last 5 years, we've made great strides in destigmatizing mental health. We still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go, but I think programs like this and some other things that we're doing on a statewide level, that we are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I believe that also. I think in the last several years we've made really big headway on just diving into the the mental impact that the profession has on individuals, and it's gotten to be a little bit more acceptable to start talking about it, right? To start
Yep.
saying, hey, it's okay to say, man, that call really, really got me.
Yep.
And and kind of being able to express that. And I think what you're saying is, history, kind of in law enforcement is you internalize it, right? You bottle it up, you keep it to yourself, and then what happens is, like, you just feel like you're the only one that's dealing with this because nobody else is saying anything, right? And then that isolation sets in because you don't want to be around anybody, and then all those little lies start creeping in, and then that's when we have people make bad decisions. Some of them even result in their own death. So that's what we want to try to avoid. We want to try to get away from that. We want to try to just promote, like, hey, it's okay for you to say, man, this one's pretty hard, and I might need to go and just kind of talk this one out.
Yeah, you're right. And what you're describing is, so in the therapy world, cognitive behavioral therapy. Thoughts create feelings, and feelings create behaviors.
Yep.
And as humans, we have three different kinds of thoughts. And they're all automatic: automatic positive, automatic neutral, and automatic negative. And the neutral and positive, they don't affect us in a bad way. Actually, positive thoughts, those automatic positive thoughts, can give us a boost in our spirits. But those automatic negative thoughts, when you're isolated and insulated, when you withdraw, they as you said, they kind of creep in, and then our brain, it plays tricks on us, and that's when it can get into anxiety, depression, maybe some post-traumatic stress, some other mental health disorders. But it's our job to recognize when an automatic negative thought is coming in, confronting it, actually saying, okay, I'm having one of those thoughts, because we still get them. You can't stop them from happening. But if we can recognize it, say, all right, I'm having a negative thought. That's not necessarily true. And then reframe it. So if we can reframe our negative thoughts to make them neutral, then we can be healthier. And for the people in our profession, for us to be at our optimal, you talked about physical. We need to be physically, spiritually, and mentally fit to best serve the citizens that we've sworn oath to protect and to serve. So we need to make sure we're taking care of our brain.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of different modalities out there that you can dive into to kind of reframe that, like cognitive behavioral therapy, and then, cognitive processing therapy. Like, all those are really, in my opinion, are really good for law enforcement, because that helps them, debunk and reframe those negative thoughts that they have. Some of those stem from childhood, right? That they've learned, that are ingrained in them. Some of them come from the profession, right? Because of what they've seen and what they've, witnessed and been a part of. So, I know there's a lot of other modalities that are out there going on right now. I mean, EMDR is a big thing, coming up in the first responder world and things like that. But, definitely that ability to start recognizing and reprocessing and alter those negative held beliefs, that really helps individuals kind of change the way they, perceive themselves, but also, individuals around them in society and the people they deal with. So.
Yeah, for sure. No, absolutely. And it's because of the work you're doing, getting the word out, normalizing this stuff. That's we have to understand that an abnormal reaction to an abnormal event is normal behavior.
Yeah.
That's from Viktor Frankl. He wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. He survived Auschwitz, and his message was, so they took everything. The Nazis took everything away from him, but they couldn't take his spirit. So as long as we know who we are, our spiritual side, our spirit stays with us, and we can forgive ourselves, then we can get through pretty much anything. But an abnormal reaction to an abnormal event is normal behavior. So what you're doing is great, because we're normalizing stuff that we have to go through.
Yeah, and there's so many of his quotes that you can pull out and you can use. I mean, the moment that suffering ceases to be suffering, right?
Yep.
Then it finds purpose, and just all of those where in between stimulus and response, there's a space, right? And in that response is our freedom to choose.
That's
and
right.
That's what we're trying to, like, instill back into people is like, look, it's like you can get through this stuff, right? It's going to be a struggle. It might be hard, but you can get on the other side.
That's
And
right.
it might take some work. It might take you kind of digging in and changing that mindset. But there's not very many people that I have on here that start throwing out Viktor Frankl quotes and things like that. So that's neat because I'll use those a lot in service training. I'll throw one in there here and there, and and he the one you referred to is like he says that that what they can't take from me is how I respond to what you do to me.
That's
right.
right. That's
And
right.
when we start thinking about that, it's like we have a choice.
Yep.
Right. And I was just explaining this to my 10-year-old the other day, my daughter. So look, we have a choice, and it's hard. Both ways is hard, right? Controlling our emotions, controlling how we respond is hard, right?
Yep. Yep.
That's hard, but on the offset of that, it makes things a little bit easier because you were able to control your emotions, control the way you respond to things, and then things are a little bit easier on the other side of that. Or you can do what's easier and just let your emotions take hold of you, and and just respond in those. But then generally the consequences out of that are hard.
That's right.
Right. So we have that choice. We choose our heart. It's hard to invest into to learn new ways to cope with things and deal with things, and that's hard to work through that. But on the upside of that, it's much better in the long run. Or we can just choose to do what's easier and not talk about it and stuff it down and stow it, and but it's going to come back.
Right.
And when it comes back, it's generally going to be harder.
Yeah, and when we stow it, oftentimes comes back as anger.
Yeah.
And the quote I use when I see people that are just angry at everything, and I say to them, I said, anger is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. So you can be angry at someone, but that has no effect on them. They are going on their journey, but you're hurting yourself by holding that anger. So like you said, being able to make a choice, whether it's forgiveness or just forgiveness for yourself, having grace with yourself for just holding on to the anger can help you bounce back and be more productive.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people don't understand. Like when we start talking about forgiveness, they're like, "Well, you don't understand what they've done," and that is true, right? There's cases where we just do not we don't know the hurt that's there. But what a lot of people don't understand is that forgiveness has more to do with you and your own growth than it has to do with the other person.
That's right.
Because the longer you hold on to that, it just festers. It just it just grows, and it just has that deep rooted seed in you, and eventually it's just gonna affect everything. It's like a cancer that just grows.
That's right.
And eventually you're gonna have to do something about it. So,
and it's not an easy lesson to learn. And
no,
and I'm sure as we move on in this, you'll hear an example of how, and I'll share how angry I was, and it took me years to forgive myself.
Yeah. So I mean, we could sit here and just go on like this, but to obviously the law enforcement profession is a hard profession, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of things that you've experienced throughout your career. So, what is something, if you're willing to share, that, was a particularly hard, maybe call for service or an incident or critical incident you went through, and then how did you get on the other side of it?
Yeah.
That's what we really want to promote is like, hey, yeah, you may have had a really rough, call or critical incident, but you can get on the other side of that. And that's what we want to promote, right? We want to promote that ability to talk and share.
No, and that's a great question. As to choose one event can be difficult because we go through so much. We go through so much trauma that it can be difficult to say, well, it's this one. But you always remember your first or maybe your second, right? So it was my third year in as a deputy sheriff, and I was looking for a murder suspect with my team, and turned into a foot chase. Someone throwing a gun, and then a fight, a serious fight, and then the suspect ended up crushing me between his car and the police car twice. He crushed me twice. I couldn't move, and I was knocked out. I was out. I came to, and my partners were shooting at the suspect, and a riot started, prolonged riot, and they ended up taking us both to the same hospital, which is another riot. But this is in 2000. This is I mean, and I can still remember every up to the point I was knocked out. I can remember how it went. It was slow motion. We hear about that, auditory exclusion, all that kind of stuff. I didn't think so. Fast forward, both got out of the hospital. He lived. He was charged with attempted murder. I lived, severe injuries to my body. But when you go through something like that, all of a sudden there are 3 different investigations. There's the internal investigation, the criminal investigation of him trying to kill me, and then the criminal investigation into the response to resistance when my partner shot at him and hit him. They hit him once. Now all of a sudden, no one talks to you. So you talk about being isolated and insulated, and that's what happened. Except for one guy who's brand new to the agency, he called me. He said, "You don't know me. I just want to see how you're doing." And I still remember his name. I remember him. Followed his career. He's doing great. But I'll never forget that because that was the only call I got after the immediate aftermath. So I didn't know if I could do the job again. I questioned myself. We talk about the shoulda, woulda, couldas. I should have done this. I could have done that. I would have done that. And then I felt responsible for putting my partners in that position. I felt like it was my fault it happened. So all that crept in, nightmares, sound, sights, all the classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Went back to work a couple months later. Wasn't sure if I could do it. I got into the next fight, and I realized, no, I can still do this. And I was still a SWAT operator at the time, and all while it's going through the criminal justice process, I'm still working. It takes, as you know, a year and a half for something like this to be resolved, and was involved in many, many more critical incidents after that: shootings, suicides, watching people kill themselves. So all that layers on, and then at trial, he was found not guilty by a jury. He was found guilty of resisting with violence and marijuana possession, but not guilty of the crime that would have sentenced him to, if not life, 25 years. So then there's the sense of betrayal. Sense of betrayal from whether it's the agency or the community or the judge or the criminal justice system. And that's what I was talking about, the anger, right? And I was angry at the suspect. I was angry at the judge. I was angry at the defense attorney who made me look like I was somebody that I wasn't. And I held on to the anger for a long time. And again, staying connected to my faith and my wife. We didn't have kids at that time. It took a long time. But really, when I was forgiving myself because I had to realize I was doing the best I could at the time with the information I had. And that's something very difficult to get to. It sometimes takes a long time. But I was eventually able to do that. And for many years, I couldn't talk about the incident without it bringing up this response, this emotional, physical response. But, whether it's through faith and through forgiveness and through therapy, now I speak about it a lot. And every time I speak about it, it's better for me because I'm getting it out. I train around the state. I've spoken about this incident in detail around the country. And now, because of the work I put in to myself, I'm able to speak about it and hopefully help others get there faster than it took me to get there. And again, having grace, forgiving myself, understanding I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. So again, that takes a long time. But then you have to remember all the other stuff that piles on top of that we have to empty out our bucket. If we don't empty it out, it's going to overflow, or it'll lead to increased risky behaviors, addictions or substance misuse, or anger, or treating people badly. I just had a talk with the new recruits when I say new recruits, new agents to FDLE, but they're all seasoned officers. And my counterpart said, no one wants to work for a jerk. And when I spoke, I said, I want to close on, I was that jerk. I said, I was not successful in my career until I took a self-assessment, an honest self-assessment, and looked at myself and said, what am I doing good and what am I doing bad? And until I worked at myself, I was stuck. But as soon as I worked at myself, my career opened up, and I had all these different experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's a big key factor in this is being able to work through, that whatever that incident is, or those cumulative incidents, and then being able to share that so that it prompts other people to be able to do the same.
Yeah, it is, and that's why and I'll get into it maybe a little later, but what FDLE is doing on a statewide level is we're having retreats called post-critical incident seminars for anybody in law enforcement and their partner, life partner, partner of work, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend. It's free of charge, but I go to every one, and I share that story with them because, again, normalizing it, but also saying, hey, we are all different. Different agencies, different names, different sexes, ethnicities, races, but we're common because we share trauma. We all have been through trauma. And so I just want to make sure they know that they're not alone, and that it's normal to have these byproducts of that trauma.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a lot to unpack. I mean, and anytime you share one of those experiences, it always it kind of gets a little heavy. So I like to kind of follow it up with that. So what's one of the funniest or most awkward calls or experiences that you've had while in the career?
So I'm not a native Floridian. I'm from Boston. The most wild animal I saw growing up was maybe a raccoon or a squirrel. And so coming down to Florida, and particularly Southwest Florida, all the different insects and animals. But I was still relatively new, and I was walking out to my personal vehicle, and there was an alligator under my back tire. And I could see the body and the tail sticking out. And I'm like, nope, I'm not going near that. And then I look around the corner, there's my sergeant and a couple of my partners. They laughed because they found a dead alligator and they put it under my tire to watch my reaction. So I'll always remember that. That was okay, they've accepted me in Florida, and I still didn't touch it. That made them touch it. But at the same time, that was funny.
There's always some of those stories that happen when you're the new person, or when somebody figures out there's something that you're maybe not too keen on, or maybe you're scared of spiders or something like that, and then there's always somebody who ends up trying to work a fake spider or a fake snake or a dead alligator into
it's always
to get you
animals
reacted.
with me. It was always animals. I remember going to a cow in the middle of the road at midnight, and I got there, and there's the cow, and a native Floridian, another deputy, she asked me if it was a boy or girl. I said, well, it's a boy. She goes, how do you know? I said, it has horns. And of course, everyone laughed. So I thought if you had horns, you were a boy, but that's another learning experience for me with livestock.
Yeah. So, when we look at law enforcement, we know that it's a demanding, profession. We know that it takes a toll on individuals. So, but we also know that there can be, some learning factors in it too. So when you look over your career, what are some of the key things or the key factors that you've learned, that you'd like to pass on to others?
Yeah. It goes back, really goes back to the basic principles, I think. Again, learning process. Treat others, doesn't matter who they are. Treat them with respect as long as they're treating you with respect. I remember, I arrested a couple. They both had crack cocaine when crack cocaine was a big thing. But I treated them with dignity and respect. And I arrested them. About 6 months later, I'm in front of their house fighting a guy. It was just me and him. Now, the couple was there, but I'm fighting somebody else that was at their house. And I lost, during the fight, my radio, so I couldn't call for help. My OC spray, when I sprayed him, he grabbed it and threw it. So I was down to my asp and my gun. And the fight as fights go, they're quick, but this was a longer, quick fight, I guess. And the couple, they helped me. The wife called 911, and the husband helped me handcuff him. And so I tell my kids, but I also told the younger cops, so you never know who's going to be your ally, your advocate. So when you can, always treat people with dignity and respect, because you never know when they may be there to help you. So that's one of the biggest lessons I learned very quickly. But I think it goes back to faith, right? I mean, we're called to treat people with respect, even when they may fight us. And when I got this guy handcuffed and he was off to jail, and it goes back to treating them with respect, because we don't know. It's not our job to know what's going on in their lives, but it's our job to always behave and act accordingly. So that's one. I think another thing is never stop learning. Never stop working on yourself. Read, not just the statute book, because that's what I did when I first started, but read. Try to expand your mind, expand your horizons, and challenge yourself to learn something new. Because if you're so stuck on thinking one way, you won't be open to new ideas. So always learn, always challenge yourself to learn, and then take calculated risks. I've said it to the newer agents. Tallahassee's my, I think, fifth move for FDLE. And it seemed like however many years, depending on where my station was, we moved and had wonderful support from my wife and my kids. If you're willing to take those calculated risks and challenge yourself, you'll have a great career. And that's what I tell. That's my advice to everyone coming into the profession.
Yeah, and those are three good key points to for anybody to just take hold of and instill, no matter where they're at in their profession. I mean, they could be just coming in, or they could even be 15, 20, 25 years in and start to look at retirement, but you can still learn. You can still treat people with respect, right? You can still learn and grow and educate yourself, and and especially you can look at those and take those calculated risks, just like you said. I mean, and that's calculated risk. It's not just
Right.
a off the cuff or whatever. So those are great key points to focus in on. And with that, I mean, obviously, with your position, you do a lot with obviously wellness and well-being
Yeah.
with your guys. So across the board, new recruits, academies, do you think we're doing enough to really prepare them for the profession, for the job?
So I think meeting the basic requirements, we're hitting the mark. I'm very proud in where Florida stands among the country with the way we lean into new ideas or lean into the requirements we have in the academy or the state exam. Where I think it falls off is when they get into wherever they're working, and it's the nature of the job that you get so busy, the focus becomes a job, and you end up neglecting yourself. So we need to, my wish, my thought is we need to expand the mental health um, professionals into every organization. And, money, listen, it all comes down to finances, unfortunately. But in a perfect world, we would have therapists in every agency to provide that care that's needed. And then we could have physical trainers, fitness trainers in every agency to make sure we're complementing the two sides. But the biggest stressor I see, or the biggest challenge I see, is lack of therapy, lack of therapists that are competent to treat us. So that's what, again, FDLE, what we're doing on a statewide level, in addition to the post-curricular incident seminar, and really what that is, that's a 3-day retreat. And during that 3-day retreat, it's peer-driven. So we train the peers. They're from all different agencies. They come in, and the participants come in with their partners or spouses. And immediately they're given some psychological tools so we can see where they're at, whether it's, PTSD, depression, or anxiety. But it's peer-driven. So right away, peers, so people just like them who've been through similar instances, they're making that connection. We talked about connection earlier. And then over the 3 days, they're provided psychoeducation. So they're provided with information of, why you're angry. Well, you might have a traumatic brain injury. If you ever have a concussion, that's a traumatic brain injury, and that affects the brain differently. Or they're then the psychological effects of our job are given to them. And then psychotherapy. So you had some great modalities. CPT, CBT, EMDR. We use what's called accelerated resolution therapy, or ART. And it's based on eye movement. So it's similar to EMDR because it's eye movement or tapping. But ART has been proven to work quicker than EMDR. So it's more efficacious, quicker. It's been studied downrange overseas with special operators, where they'll go off and do what they do, and they come back. There's a therapist that provides them ART right then and there. So cleans out the bad stuff. So all of our therapists that we use, they are veteran and law enforcement competent. So they know what they're doing. We provide that therapy, and then we give them collaborative care. So to help build up therapists that are competent, FDLE does a 2-day training called Law Enforcement Culture for Clinicians. It's a 2-day training. The first day's lecture, we just put police officers in front of them, and they discuss their career. So it's unfiltered. They discuss what they've been through, so the therapist can hear how we talk, how we share our stories. And then the second day, they're put into 2 different scenarios. One's a shoot-don't shoot simulator, and then the second scenario is we make them part of an active shooting situation. It's as close to real life as we can get, using blanks and role players and fake blood, and so that gives them a look into our profession, which can ultimately help them better understand us. Because one of the biggest complaints I've heard from law enforcement professionals is that the therapist wasn't ready to hear what that person had to share, and we traumatize the therapist. So we're trying to reverse the trend of we're getting cops ready and corrections officers ready, and then we give them nothing when they get out of the academy until they're in crisis. So we're trying to provide resources that gives them support from the beginning all the way through their careers and actually post-career. We just held our 4th PCIS. It was for command staff members, captains and above. We'll have 4 more this year. For the fiscal year 25-26, we're hoping to do 8 and then 16 the following year, because every PCIS is full and we have a waiting list. So the need is there. People may not say they need it, but they want to get to it because of how it's working. And so that's what I think we need to do better. The academy is great with getting them ready. We're teaching them the skills they need, but then there's a gap until they're in crisis, and we need to get them before they're in that crisis.
Yeah, and that's a huge, that's a huge, thing that we see across the board, right? Is just kind of that lack of, hey, this is the job. We know this is a job. This is what affects you. This is how it affects you. Here are some tools for you to be able to invest back in yourself
Yeah.
to kind of keep this stuff in check. And I'm pretty fortunate in my agency and with our leadership that they give me the ability to focus in on that,
Yeah.
right, and to speak into them for just that, keep that forefront in their mind.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the way Florida's built and the way 67 sheriffs, which is very exciting. I love that all 67. We have 67 now, but then 400 something municipalities. Um, you know, and with the sheriff's offices typically being the biggest agency in that area, could we take what you do at your agency, kind of replicate that around the state? Then we have regional response groups to include therapists. So,
Yeah.
I know where you are. Let's say a small police department, they don't have the resources, but we have regional people between your agency and some other agencies and therapists that we can send there, and provide that support to the smaller, less fiscally, uh, fiscally constrained, more
Yeah.
fiscally constrained agencies.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, that would be a great program for those smaller agencies that don't have those resources, that maybe they want to be able to invest like that, but they just don't have the resources, don't have the
Right.
funds to do that. Because to be able to start that and kind of bring that into your agency, your department, that requires forward thinking on the administration's part, but also the ability to bring those resources in, right, and to
Yep.
cover that fiscal cost that it does incur.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a heavy lift. I mean, when it comes down to money, that's what's unfortunate is you look on the return on investment side, you look at the financial side of things, and a lot of times wellness is put down the bottom because there are other critical things that need to be funded.
Yeah.
But I'd submit that wellness is critical because if we have a healthy member, a healthy officer, a healthy deputy, civilian, there'll be less sick time taken, less vacation time taken, less injuries reported, less medical bills because they won't need to see these doctors for whatever they're suffering from. So maybe that's where we can kind of shift focus and say no, wellness needs to be maybe not the top priority, but maybe towards the top.
Yeah.
Because a healthier employee is a better employee.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, wellness is an important factor in just the law enforcement professional's life. And yes, having a wellness program, having wellness resources costs money, but so do lawsuits, right?
That's right.
So,
That's right. And
and
a
you think
suicide.
about,
Someone,
yeah,
if someone
you-
kills themselves, that costs the agency hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And you hate to put a cost on it,
yeah,
but you save one life, you're saving over $1 million. Simple as
yeah.
that.
I mean, if you put thousands and thousands of dollars into a program and it saves one life,
Yep.
then it was successful,
Yep,
right?
that's right.
Then it was absolutely successful.
So I would like to touch on the suicide aspect. So
Yeah, absolutely.
there's a lot of nonprofits that do a great job trying to report the accurate number of law enforcement suicide, law enforcement corrections and probation, active and former of that class suicides around the country. And I've always seen every year for the whole country, all 50 states, it's around 170, 180, maybe 160. And then in Florida, it's always hovering between 12 to 14. So last year, we have a research group here at FDLE who said, hey, is there a way to really focus on law enforcement corrections and probation suicide, current and former, and accurately reported? And that was my only question to them. I said, can we do it? And they went back and, there are PhDs and people that think that kind of research. And they came back with a methodology where it's the most accurate reported anywhere in the country. And they did a 3-year test, so 21, 22, and 23. And it was like 41, 44, and 48. So it was an average of 44 per year for those 3 years. And I was like, wow, that's shocking. That's triple, sometimes quadruple that what's being reported. So they went back, and now they're doing a formal research project. They went back to a 10-year study. 10-year study of officer corrections and probation, LEO, suicide for 10 years. For the past 10 years, Florida has had 444 known suicides among that population. Again, 44 a year, 1 every 8 days. So if we're not unique, if Florida's not unique to the country, and we're close to 4 times the amount of what's previously been reported, what does the real numbers look like around the country?
Yeah.
You know, and I think Florida's willing to be the lead researcher for the whole country, and that's what the team's working on. But I would suggest that if we can do an accurate number of suicides every year through the country, that'll get the attention of everyone, and we can start approaching this topic much differently.
Yeah.
Because it will be an epidemic.
Yeah. And, there's something that this is my own personal thought, but, the reason I believe that the suicides stay the way they are, at the number they are, is because, the individuals, they feel isolated, right?
Yep.
They feel like no one else is going through or experienced or dealt with what they're dealing with, right? Obviously, everybody deals with things differently, right? But
Yep.
because we don't, highlight this stuff, because, we encourage and we, indoctrinate our new recruits to not say anything, right? And to kind of keep it in and to stow it because, FTO doesn't say anything, and,
Yep.
the new recruit doesn't say anything because the FTO is not saying anything. So they feel isolated. And the other thing is the devil's a liar, right?
Yep.
He's going to capitalize on your hopelessness and your despair, and he's going to feed those lies.
That's
and
right.
The other thing is people don't understand, a lot of the significance or the decisions around suicide, right? You hear it all the time. They're like, oh, well, how could this person be so selfish? Or how could this person do this? Don't they know the ripple effect that this has on their family and their friends? And yeah, well, some of that may be true, but what they don't understand is all that person wants is for the pain to stop, right?
That's right.
For the trauma to stop, whatever it is that's manifesting, that's that driving factor. They just want it to stop. And for them, in that moment, that is the most logical decision for them. Now, for us on the outside, we look at it and we're like, well, that's right. It's not logical. But then we have to understand that for that individual, at that moment in time, they're in so much, distress that it's like, this is the most logical decision. This is the best course for me.
That's right.
And, that then they decide to take their life. So when I hear that, I try to like, hey, hold on. Like, okay, there might be a little bit of truth in there, but you have to consider the factors involved. You have to consider the current state of the individual involved, and what their thought process is, because they're in crisis. So we can't expect them to think reasonably or accurately in those situations. And I think that that's something that we do still in the first responder community, just across the board. That I think is unfair to those who are struggling with those suicidal thoughts and those ideations, because there's just not that understanding of really
Right.
what they're going.
Right. And you hit on the hopelessness. It's the suicide triangle is hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness.
Yep.
And when that triangle's completed, then the likelihood of a suicide is increased exponentially. But the other thing you touched on is guilt and shame, right? When you isolate, when someone's isolated and insulated, and they're getting all the negative automatic thoughts, and then the guilt and shame comes in. I feel guilt because I didn't do this, or the shame because I brought embarrassment to my family, and all that combined leads to suicide, and in particular, you know, and then the way we have reacted to suicide among law enforcement members brings in more of that guilt and shame. Well, if I do it, no one's going to love me. So again, that's the whole aspect to it. But if we can tie the suicide back to an injury that happened on the job, I think that passed a couple of years ago. It could be considered a line of duty death now federally. There's still no money benefits with it, but that's the other thing we need to look at is brain injury. Traumatic brain injury signs and symptoms are reminiscent, almost the same as PTSD.
Yeah.
So we people may say, well, that person, they got PTSD. Well, they may, but have they had a concussion? Are they angry? Is their anger out of control? And because if they have a traumatic brain injury, then we have to think about chronic traumatic encephalopathy or CTE that we saw in the football players. They kill themselves because their brain was eating itself. Yeah. I lectured around the country on some research I did looking at TBIs within law enforcement. And now the Brain Bank, the Concussion Legacy Foundation in Boston and Boston University, they are taking first responder brains to research. Do we have CTE within the law enforcement profession? Again, that might shed some light on why we have so many suicides. Is it brain injury?
Yeah.
And if it is, now we know a better way to go after and treat that person.
Yeah, and are you familiar with the Haley Brain Wellness Institute out of Jacksonville?
No, tell me about it.
So they do a lot of work with TBIs with veterans and now first responders. So they will actually, it's all covered under a grant. So, if it's somebody who potentially has had any type of head injury, right, head trauma, they would be able to go through and do their initial 3-day assessment, and then depending on what that looks like, if they're like, hey, yes, you do have a TBI, then they can be brought in for a 3-week intensive inpatient. They'll work through it, and that's all covered under a grant. And it's only veterans and law enforcement that go there. And so actually, I've gone up there and I've toured their facility. It's really well done. It's really well put together. And then I actually, because I want to know, like, hey, if I'm going to send somebody, I want to know what it's like. So I actually put myself through their 3-day assessment. And they take you through a whole different, battery of exams, and they do, they do physical therapy, they do speech therapy, they do, different, they do a neurophysical assessment on you too, where they measure it. So you've got your physical therapy portion, but then they also do a neural feedback where it's like, okay, well, how is your brain, communicating with the rest of your body, right? Is there any delay? Is there any lag because of a potential of a TBI? So it's not just like one component. Then if you meet the criteria and you say, hey, yes, you would benefit from our intensive, then you go back and then they have all kinds of different modalities that you go through, right? You'll actually sit down, with a psychologist. You'll go and you'll sit down with the neurophysical therapist. You'll sit down with the speech therapist. They've got art therapy. They'll do acupuncture. They'll do all kinds of different modalities that will work in, and they've got a lot of good, really success rates. So they've had individuals come in, that are veterans that come in limping, right, because they've got some type of injury. And then when they leave, they're not limping anymore.
Wow.
And I know it sounds kind of like, is it the magic potion? And it's like, well, no, it's because they figured out that there was a block between, the neural processing of their brain and their physical body, right?
Yeah,
and they were able to work through that. Yeah, it's the Haley Brain Institute. Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look that up because that'd be a great resource for us to refer people to. And I know I wouldn't be surprised if they use hyperbaric chamber as well to get the brain oxygenated and help it heal itself. You know?
Yep.
That's amazing. Thanks for letting me know that.
Yeah, and I was really pleased. They take really good care of you, and everything is done well.
Great. Yeah, I'm gonna look into that for sure.
So, I mean, we're getting close to being able to wrap up here, but before we finish up, as you look back over your career, where you're at now, how much is your faith played a factor into where you're at today?
It's I smile because I still remember because I've been really into my faith. I've wandered, and I've come back, and I remember talking to my pastor, and I said, Father, I haven't been around in a while. He's like, that's okay, as long as you come back. And the faith is what grounds me. It's what gives me peace. It reminds me why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I continue doing this, because I have to. This is what I'm supposed to do. And that also helps me get to build resilience, or to get to that forgiveness that I talked about earlier, because whatever I've gone through is because I'm supposed to go through it. Because growth is uncomfortable. It's, you picture a seedling reaching through the soil, reaching for the sun, and man, that's gonna be really uncomfortable. For us to grow, we have to be uncomfortable. And I think whether the stuff, like I said, physical or emotional, spiritual things I've been through, it's been really hard. But it helps me get to acceptance faster and builds resilience, because I said, okay, this was hard, this was tough, but this is my journey. And that's where a strong faith keeps me grounded, because things we deal with, and I'm sure you've dealt with it at your agency, is spiritual moral injury. When we lose faith, that can be some of the hardest injury to come back from, because when we lose it, how do you find it again?
Yeah.
And when we lose it, then we lose control of what we're doing. So that's why faith to me is at the forefront. If I didn't have faith, I wouldn't be in this job anymore. I wouldn't be able to do it, and I'd still be angry. I'd still hold resentment. I wouldn't be able to forgive. Faith gives me that cornerstone to be able to forgive, move on, and build resiliency, and get to acceptance of all things that have happened.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, that's always a component that I always come back and say, man, I don't know how you do the profession without faith.
Yeah.
So, well, sir, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you, just coming on here, sharing your insights, sharing, your knowledge, and we'll just continue pushing forward and making sure that our individuals and our people get the the resources and help they need.
Yeah, thank you, Vernon, and thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for your mission. I know you have a lot of other things going on, and for you to do this is another vocation.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you doing this and getting the word out and looking after the men and women that we serve, that work for us. But by serving those who serve, they'll be better servants to the community. So thank you for what you do.
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you tuning in and listening to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and share this resource with your fellow officers. The goal of Critical Aspects is to serve, support, and sustain the law enforcement professionals. So head over to www.criticalaspects.org for more resources and information. And as always, God bless and be safe.